Welcome to Monster Territory, brought to you by the Foul Territory Network. I'm joined by a very special guest tonight, Geoff Pontes. How you doing, my friend?
Pretty good, man. How you doing? Glad to be
Yeah, we're
here.
doing great, man. And honestly, I mean, you guys picked a perfect day to release the new farm system rankings for Baseball America. And I mean, I'm in quite the happy mood today.
Yeah.
Just to kind of get a quick thought on the Red Sox farm system right now. What was the thinking behind putting the Red Sox at the number one spot out of all these good farm systems?
Yeah. They were number one in the handbook process. Even before that, kind of coming out of the end of last year. We're probably going to end up being our number one with some graduations, etc. They made some trades. I think it just, speaks to the volume. To the depth of the system. They were able to trade out good prospects, like Brady Montgomery, who's going to be a top 100 guy, Kyle Teal, who's like a top 50-ish type of prospect. Those guys hold a lot of weight. So, if you have multiple top 10 prospects, you have three top 15 prospects, that's going to push you way up to the top. But I think even beyond that, we're starting to see just throughout the system, a lot of the international signees have been pretty good. Some of the guys that were signed in the most recent class were pretty good. And the pitching overall. And I think just historically, as somebody who grew up in this area, still lives in this area, I grew up 15 minutes from McCoy Stadium. Went to hundreds of games there growing up. It's where my love of the game was really fostered. There weren't a lot of pitching prospects outside of Buckholz and Lester. That was like the only generation
Yep.
that had kind of like legitimate guys that were, potential front end, to mid rotation pieces. That's not something that we've seen historically from the Red Sox.
Yep.
We've started to see more of that, and I actually think the system probably would have ranked even higher. It couldn't, but like in terms of the scoring, we do like an evaluation behind the scenes where prospects that rank in a certain area, it's a drive line actual equation that sort of puts together what their surplus value is versus, the overall, global picture of prospects. But a guy like Louis Perales, for example, had he not gotten hurt, I think probably would be somewhere in like the top 60 or 70 in this system. I still had him as a top 100 prospect. Some other people on staff did too. He just sort of missed on that back end of the top 100. So I think, it's a system that continues to improve, and, it hasn't all been guys that have gone in the top of the draft. You look at Anthony, you look at Campbell, those were comp picks that they got for guys that walk, whether it was Xander Bogaerts, or what was the Anthony one? I'm drawing a blank right now on who it was that walked on that one. But even some of the guys they've let leave, they've turned those picks into some. Oh, it was Eduardo Rodriguez. They've turned those
Yes.
picks into something pretty good. So I think some of the pain that the fan base has felt over the last couple of years, it really hasn't been good here since the day Mookie Betts got traded,
Yeah.
and we've as a fan base, I think everyone's kind of just been clamoring to see the Red Sox finally get into the playoffs and compete in a really, really loaded AL East.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. And I got to bring up, you brought up Clay Buchholz. You brought back some good memories at McCoy. I saw one of his last starts at McCoy against Rochester. I believe that was in June or July of 2007. And of course, he looked great in that start. I think it was like 7 innings, 9 Ks. I think he got like an unlucky home run against them or something. Can't remember. But we need
Yeah.
more Clay Buchholz in the system. And we'll talk more about the pitching a little bit later. Before we do dive into some specific prospects, I do just want to let everyone know Baseball America has a great deal going right now. On the screen, if you're here on YouTube, you can see the code at the bottom with the QR code. Monster30 is the code at checkout. You get a 30% discount for a 1-year subscription. I've been a member of Baseball America, Geoff, for about 5-6 years now since I started my main channel, and it's been just amazing. So thank you for all you guys, what you do. It really helps me, my potato brain, try to talk as much as I can about some baseball over here. So but let's dive into some specifics here. We got Roman Anthony, right? Everyone's talking about Roman Anthony in Red Sox land. I'll just ask point blank. What are your thoughts on Roman Anthony coming into 2025?
Yeah, and I think, he's kind of the de facto number one prospect in the game. Roki Sasaki qualifies as a prospect. We have to rank him there as a prospect.
Yep.
Our lists are one of the lists that impact
Did
PPI.
sorry to interrupt. Did that pain you having to put Roki ahead of Roman Anthony?
A little bit. I think just because he deserved it. I was there in Worcester, and I was the one that broke the news to Roman and told him, "Hey, you're going to be our number one prospect when our new
That's cool.
top 100 end of season list comes out." We also at the same time, had already picked Christian Campbell as our minor league player of the year. I got to talk to Christian about that. Was kind of hanging out in the dugout. I live about 15 minutes away from Polar, so kind of grew up close to McCoy, and then they moved the team closer to where I settled. So
Yeah.
I'm always around the Red Sox AAA teams. But yeah, I think, you look at Roman really from the moment he stepped into pro ball, really started to evolve. I think that him and Campbell are kind of the poster children for the progress that the Red Sox hitting development has made over the last couple of years. It's not just bat speed training, it's just focusing on challenging these guys consistently. When you talk to Brian Abraham and some of these other guys in the organization that are involved in the player development, that's a big part of it, is just competing consistently, challenging these guys every day and sort of allowing them to grow through failure. And I think that talking to Roman, that's something that he's really embraced. He was a guy coming out of high school in Florida where, he had major question marks around the hit tool. In pro ball, that has not been the case. He's floated excellent, in zone contact rates, excellent swing decision numbers, whether it's, chase rate minus swing, chase rate overall, really high level swing decisions. He's got plus bat speed. There's always been a ton of impact in here. I mean, he hits the ball as hard as just about anybody in baseball. And I think we both know people like to talk about pesky, pole in right field.
Mhm.
Ultimately, that's a really deep right field like fence. Like
Mhm.
it jots out 40, 50 feet within like 4 feet, right? So you really got to have like 70 raw power to be able to power it out as a left-handed hitter
Yes.
at Fenway Park. We saw Andrew Benintendi. That guy, over his early years when he was trying to add power, if he's in Yankee Stadium or he's playing in Great America Ballpark, he's got a chance to pop 25.
Yeah.
Trying to do that in Fenway, you end up with a lot of balls that are on the warning track. You got to have, big power. We think about the big left-handed hitters throughout Red Sox history. It's been guys with that double plus power, most recently David Ortiz. And I think, Anthony in that sense is a guy that has that level of raw power. He also brings the hit tool. He has the ability to get on base. He's a pretty good outfielder. He's played mostly center field, but I think he's got the skills and ability to handle right field, which is no easy task and sometimes tougher than center field in a lot of ballparks just because of how much space you got to cover and the weird caroms, et cetera, and making plays along the wall. He's got all those tools. He can run a little bit. I don't know if he's going to be up this year just because of the glut of outfielders that they currently have on the roster. There's almost not enough positions for the amount of guys that could be starting outfielders. He might get a little bit more time in Worcester. But I don't think that's going to be a problem. Should be a guy that hits the ground running whenever he does come up, if that's midseason, or if there's some trades made and, maybe the Red Sox do put their belief in him and say, hey, this guy is ready to break camp. I think it's all well within, the possibilities that could potentially happen here in 2025. He's a really exciting player, and I just think pound for pound is the best positional prospect in the game.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the how he's been challenging himself. There was a clip floating around on Twitter not too long ago. I believe he was speaking with Trevor Story, saying he's going up against the machine, looking at different shapes of pitches and whatnot. And Story himself is saying that's a pretty mature answer. To hear a young guy talking about stuff like that. You brought up how he had some holes, some question marks coming out of high school. What do you believe maybe was a bit of a turnaround for him going into pro ball? Any idea there?
Yeah, I just think it was, he was local because he's, it's East Coast of Florida, but obviously it's not that hard to get, from Fort Lauderdale area to Fort Myers. And, he spent a lot of time working with their hitting people. Red Sox have done a really good job of kind of running these off-season camps, et cetera, down there in Fort Myers. They use a lot of the tech. They have a lot of their high-level coaches there working with the guys on swings, making adjustment, postural stuff. And they're just able to unlock things. I haven't dug in deep or talked to Roman specifically about what the aha moment is. Might be a good thing. I've talked to him a lot about what he's done over the last year. I've talked to the organization and wrote a little bit about how they embrace the traject machine technology, which is more or less a pitching robot that projects a particular pitcher, and you could plug in anybody pretty much. Like the guys in Worcester were telling me, so they have one in Worcester, they have one in Boston, and they have one down in Fort Myers at the spring training facility. So these guys are constantly hitting off of it. And the one in Worcester, these guys would go and take BP before the game in the tunnel, against the machine. Most of the time, they're not taking BP on the field for that reason, against the actual starting pitcher from that night. And the thing that's unique about this traject machine is it more or less gives you the most perfect version of each pitcher's pitch. So, like, if you're facing Garrett Cole, it's going to be, 18 and a half inches a ride at 98 miles an hour from, his perfect release height. It's going to be his best slider. So you're not just facing these guys, like, you're facing these guys with their best pitches. So it blows a lot of guys up. Like, talking to Roman about it, he was talking about how he'll sort of, like, double up his protective gear in terms of on his arms and even on his shins, which is something he does not do in games because it blows you up that bad. Like, consistently, those machines will rip you up. And that's something that I think all throughout the organization, all those guys have hit pretty consistently against Garrett Cole already. Talking to Christian Campbell, hit, like, again in the trajectory machine, the first guy he ever hit against, I think, was Garrett Cole, which, I think it, like, is, if you're a Red Sox fan, that's probably pretty fun to see that it's like these guys are, like, more or less, like, birthed into the organization immediately facing, the best pitcher on their main rival's team, which is also a great example of, like, one of the best pitchers in baseball. So if you're going to learn to hit anybody, you're going to try to learn to hit that guy. So I think a lot of it has just been their attention to detail as an organization. A lot of credit goes to Jason Ochart, and, formerly of Driveline, was brought in actually under Chaim Bloom. And, his role has obviously expanded and grown, and we've seen what his influence has done. And their hitters are just coming out better hitters than the players that they drafted. But I think also part of it is their identification process in the draft, in that international market, targeting and finding players that have traits and attributes that they know that they can accentuate and make better.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up, how, how, the work that they've done with the position players. And, you think back over the years, feels like the Red Sox have always been a step ahead when it comes to having these great position player prospects, right? Dustin Pedroia, Jacoby Ellsbury, Will Middlebrooks was, he was hot coming up, right? Jacoby
Devers.
Ellsbury, Mookie Betts, Devers, so many,
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. I think, that's all been part of it. And I think, we haven't even talked about him much yet, but I think Christian Campbell is kind of the next guy, within that group. And for some people, I think that he's probably not far off from Anthony. Talking to rival teams, there was one team that I talked to in the game that had Anthony as the number one player in their model and had Campbell as the number two player in their model. And, Campbell was ranked fourth in our top 100. And I think certainly had a case for maybe even third behind, Roki and of course, Roman Anthony.
Yeah, and we're gonna dive into Christian Campbell. I do have one more question about Roman Anthony, and it was a bit of an intriguing tweet that popped up at some point over the last couple of weeks about a comparison with Roman Anthony, and that was JD Drew. I actually went back into Baseball America. I found JD Drew's scouting report, and it was eerily similar, right? A lot of the wording, right? How the ball just jumps off the bat, right? Not like a hulking kind of a guy, but just has this power that comes out of nowhere. The bat speed, the maturity, the way he carries himself. Very similar scouting reports. Would you say JD Drew is a pretty good comp?
I think so. I think the difference, though, is, like, the makeup. I think that, Roman is an intense kid that wants to win. Drew was a little bit more laid back. I think, we saw that throughout his major league career, guy that had some issues in terms of where he's going to sign. And there were always conflicts with teams and, not a guy that wanted to play through injury. Anthony's a gamer. So I think that ultimately the makeup could be the difference. He hits the ball harder, I think, than Drew did. We don't have the same sort of level of metrics of Drew at that age to know, like, how high his EVs are. I mean, Anthony's putting up James Wood type of EVs. I mean, it's top 1 percentile. So I do think it's a similar comp from the sense that, like, it's a really good all around player with power, that doesn't sell out for that power, can still hit for average. I do think the upside with Anthony, though, is probably a little bit higher than JD Drew, but it's not a bad comp. I mean, I think if you're trying to put a floor on a guy, or just even sort of a mid grade in terms of, what a reasonable outcome is, if, not everything goes to the 90th percentile. But I think with Anthony, just having been around him, 6 or 7 times, seen the work that he puts in when people kind of aren't watching, and just talking to some people that have been teammates and coaches and other folks in the organization. I just think the makeup is going to push him to another level.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, that's kind of how I thought too. It was more the skill set that I compared with the two, but JD Drew, obviously, they were, also had some injuries along the way too. I like the way you described Anthony there, being
I
a
don't want to
gamer.
scare the fan base because, like, anybody who's old enough, like I'm 43, anybody who's old enough to remember Bob Ryan and talking to Theo Epstein and asking him, what's the fascination if it's true? What's the fascination with JD Drew? I don't know if you remember that hot line, but yeah, that I don't want to
I'm
scare
getting
anybody.
a bit of a buzz in my head about what that. I feel like I remember it vaguely. So
Yeah, look it up. It was a classic Bob Ryan back when he was in his prime here in Boston.
yeah, well, yeah, listeners, let's go look that up. But another guy that's in the system that we've mentioned a couple of times here, Christian Campbell. Right off the bat, I want to ask this question because I've been kind of making this comp in my head. I haven't seen it anywhere, but it's something that I sort of came up with. Would you say Christian Campbell, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, that's completely okay. Would you say he's almost like a bigger Mookie Betts?
Yeah, I think there's some similarities, and I mean he's 6'3". I mean he looks like an NBA shooting guard. Also, like the most like humble, soft-spoken guy that you would talk to. Just somebody that just puts his head down and works. Really easy to have a conversation with. Not arrogant at all. There's sort of none of that cockiness with him, and I think like from a makeup perspective, that's very similar to the way Mookie was when he was coming up. Um, I think, the other thing too is like Mookie was drafted. There were obviously tools. There was obviously upside. He was a high school guy versus, a college guy, though Campbell only had, I think, 1 year full season at Georgia Tech. Um, but somebody who made tremendous strides over a short period of time. And I think that the industry at that time was much slower to catch up on breakouts. We didn't have as much underlying data, as much information as we do now. So it was a little bit harder to kind of gauge like how hard should we go in on this. And I felt like we spent the whole season trying to catch up with Campbell. We had heard whispers in spring training from people with the Red Sox organization, like this dude's going to be a dude. Like he was off our top 30 last year. That's almost never happened. I don't think we've ever had a position player that was off the top 30 that then went and won minor league player of the year. Talking to a lot of area scouts that had, coverage in Georgia, cross checkers that had coverage that saw him at the ACC tournament. This was a contact hitter. This was a guy that put the ball in play, hit the ball the other way. It was kind of an inside out swing. Wasn't somebody that elevated, was more of like a single digit home run guy who could play a little infield defense and could run a little bit. Not a guy that anybody was looking at as a potential star in the making. He came into the Red Sox organization, started working with their hitting group, and just immediately started to show a level of aptitude that I think was maybe I don't even know if the Red Sox anticipated how fast he was going to grow. Added good weight. They made some postural changes to the swing that allowed him, to get a little bit more loft in the ball without really having to change his bat path tremendously. And really just got a more aggressive move in terms of that first move toward the ball. And it paid dividends. They found a lot more bat speed. Like I said, he's a bigger, more athletic guy. And they did all that and they unlocked all that sort of on the fly without sacrificing the things that made him a pretty good hitter that got him drafted in the first place. The ability to make a lot of contact with very little swing and miss. Really good swing decisions in terms of being able to decipher balls from strikes and pitches that he shouldn't swing at. And just had a tremendous year. I mean, he had the best offensive year in the minors. The underlying data, even beyond the slash line stats, he got better at every single level. He was a better player at Double A than he was, in any level of A ball. He was a better hitter at Triple A than he was at Double A. We started to see the contact rates go up, and the swing and miss obviously go down. Not that there was a ton to begin with. Another guy that is a good enough athlete, puts in a ton of work on the defensive side of the ball. Just before a game, you would see this guy putting in extra work in the infield, getting reps at second base, getting reps at shortstop, getting reps at third base. He obviously got some reps in center field and the outfield as well. And I think like when you look at the way the game is developing, players that have the ability to fill into multiple spots really is such an advantage for a manager that they can fill out that lineup card in any given day. And if you have somebody at second that is a better matchup. You want to get this guy in against the lefty, and you're like, all right, we're going to move Campbell to third this day, and we're going to let Devers DH today, and whatever your sheet is going to sit or whoever's going to be, or we're going to play Campbell in center field this game or whatever. I think that just makes him even that more valuable. The things that I've heard this offseason was the standout once again in their offseason hitting camps. I think showed up to Fort Myers like 15 pounds heavier with muscle. So
Mhm.
there might have been more added power, more added strength, and more bat speed to come. And that's really, really exciting. For my money, if I had to place a bet on one player in the top 100 that could end up being the best player who's not ranked number one now, it could be Campbell. And I think that was one of the things when we started doing our list, and he was maybe ranked more like 8 or 9. I really started to pound the table and say, like, this is a guy that with certain organizations, not the Red Sox, view this guy as a top 3 prospect.
Yep.
And, potentially a player that when we're starting to hear some of these whispers already about what his offseason's been like, there could be another gear here that we're not even aware of. So this is the kind of breakout that, for an organization, that needs something like this, that needs a couple of players that are going to be impact guys when you're going against teams like the Orioles, when you're going against teams like the Yankees, even the Blue Jays and the Rays, like, there's no cakewalk in this division. You need to have a loaded team. You got to be one of the best teams in the American League if you're going to win this division, if you're going to compete, and if you're going to make it, a couple rounds into the playoffs, which is what everybody's clamoring for here. So I think, getting a big player development win on the positional side and a guy that just flew through the minor leagues, frankly. I mean, in his first full year, he's entering camp. And, I personally feel unless they sign somebody, he's probably the front runner for that second base job.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting right now in Red Sox land. You can go on Twitter and whatnot. Everyone's talking about Bregman. Arenado's been popping up, but the one guy that keeps coming up in this equation is Christian Campbell, right? Because if you bring in Bregman, he plays second. Well, what happens with Campbell at that point? But that's where you bring up that versatility where. Alex Cora, that's one thing I bring up with him all the time is he loves versatility. He basically wants a bunch of Alex Coras on his
Yeah.
team. He wants guys that can move around and play multiple positions. And, with Christian Campbell, all the credit to him. I think also it really shows how the Red Sox, like I brought up a little earlier, over the years, where they see things in a guy, whether they might have a different profile, whether they're in college, high school, but then they turn that steering wheel a little bit. And then they end up just getting on this amazing path. And Christian Campbell this past year, we brought up how he's had the best offensive profile in minor league baseball this year. Just to give the listeners an idea, he hit 330 with a 439 on base, a 558 slugging, a 180 WRC plus, 20 homers, 24 stolen bases. Now I know a lot of people say minor league numbers, but when you see numbers like that, they just jump off the page. It's incredible. Now, I do want to ask, though, about the position. If there is one position with Christian Campbell, I know he's going to have that versatility. That is going to be a profile, a good part of his profile moving forward. Where do you think ultimately his best position is?
Second base. I think just, the arm that he has is probably more fringe average, which just puts a lot of pressure on you to really be super clean with all your actions, your scoops. You got to be quick with your release. You got to be super accurate with your throws. I think at second base, his arm won't be stretched as much. He has plenty of range and the ability to do so. And I just think it's a position that, really since Dustin Pedroia left here, we've all been sort of looking for the next everyday second baseman. And I think they have it here, and there's no reason to spoil that. And even if they go out and get Arenado, I think there's a chance that they move Devers to DH permanently. They just tell Raffy to go out there and hit every day, not worry about the defensive side of the game. And, I guess the benefit there, if it's Arenado, is you're going to get a really, talented defender that's still pretty solid over there. It's going to be an upgrade from what we've seen from Devers. And, the left side of the infield, I think, has been a bit of a question mark the last couple of years because we just don't know what we're going to get from Trevor Story at this point.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up. I talked with Alex Cora a little while ago, and he said with Raffy when it comes to the defense, there were some improvements last year, but I know we're talking prospects here, but Raffy was a former top prospect. Let's talk about him real quick. What do you think? Do you think there is a chance that he could improve with the defense? And even if he does, do you think it could end up being a big difference with him?
Not really. I think he has. I think just like, he's hitting a certain age where like there's not going to be any more athleticism that's coming. And ultimately I think that's kind of like the underappreciated part of playing the infield in baseball, particularly the left side of the infield, is the level of athleticism you need to be an everyday, above average to plus defender at third base or at shortstop. I think to some degree, third base, maybe doesn't get brought up in the same vein that shortstop or catcher do for good reason. But I think in some instances it might be just as important or more important than even center field defense at this point. A really good third baseman makes the shortstop's job a lot easier.
Yeah.
He can do a little bit more to second base. That makes the job for the second baseman a little bit easier. We saw what Matt Chapman at his peak did, for those infields in Oakland. And, Marcus Simeon's best years as a shortstop were because he was next to Matt Chapman,
Yeah.
who probably could play shortstop himself. So I just kind of see it atrophying at this point. And honestly, if I'm the Red Sox, you've made the investment, keep this guy healthy.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with having, an elite DH. We saw what David Ortiz did with this organization as an elite DH for all the years that he was here. Let Raffy focus on hitting, let him go out there, hit for a high batting average, drive in 100 runs, smack 30 home runs. Let him do that job and let him not have to worry about third base. And, the pitchers will probably be pretty happy about that too. I know Cora has a close relationship. He's not going to say that, but I think just from having watched Raffy, I always thought that it was a fringy sort of thing for him. He had some things that were really good. It's a strong arm. He still has that. I still think like coming in the ball sometime with some of those scoops, he's pretty good at it. But like lateral movement, right or left, is kind of not a strength. And I just don't think physically he's capable of being above average at that. Even getting to average is kind of a question mark. You know, I don't think he's never going to play third base again, but if you can limit the exposure with him at third base, I think that's a good thing. You got Cassis at first, just keep him there. Let Raffy DH. That's, if I was building this team, that's sort of how I would look at it, especially if they're going out and getting a third baseman. I wouldn't want to move any of these guys to second base. Let Campbell be that guy and let Raffy be the DH and hit, the loaded lineup because of it.
Oh yeah, and I do want to ask this. You did bring up a name that has been on the trade block this offseason, in Tristan Casas, and I would personally like to keep him in the lineup. I would love to see what he can do over a full season. However, his name just keeps popping up for some reason. Now, this has been a talking point in Red Sox land on social media. What do you think about Raffy if they were to move Casas? All right, let's just put the hypothetical out there. What do you think about him being at first base?
I'm not sure that he'd be better at first base than he is at third. You know, um, yeah, they could probably do it. I'm sure he could probably learn the position. At that point, you probably just keep him at third base. I wouldn't trade Cassis for personally. I think that he connects well with a lot of the young guys that are going to be coming into that clubhouse. Just talking to, Roman Anthony and Marcelo at the Futures game last year. We have an event that we throw the day that everyone arrives, the Friday before the Futures game. They all come through. We talk to all these prospects. I was talking about, where to eat in the North End and
Yeah.
what places they tried in Boston because, Tristan had reached out and built a relationship with these guys. And, on off days, he would, bring them into Boston and take them out and they'd go get steaks or go get
Yeah.
Italian or whatever. And, I think that having a guy like that can kind of bridge the gap between the veterans in the locker room and the young guys coming up is only going to help those guys assimilate into a major league locker room all that quicker. So, also a Florida boy. So, he probably does have some connections there with Roman to begin with. So, yeah, I wouldn't trade Cassis myself. I know it was mentioned, they were able to get the Crochet deal done, though they were looking potentially for another pitcher. At this point, I think they're probably done.
Okay.
That's not to say it won't happen and it couldn't happen in the future, but I think when you think about this young core, having that first baseman that has that 30 home run pop, plus these young guys that are coming up that have a ton of offensive upside, you might be sacrificing, a lot of runs. And, in this division, man, regardless of what you have for your pitching staff, you're going to have to win some slugfests,
Yeah.
against all teams.
Yeah, for sure. And one name you brought up, Marcelo Mayer. It's kind of funny because Mayer was a name a few years ago that was, very high, right, coming out of that draft. And, all of a sudden, this meteoric rise from Roman Anthony and Christian Campbell, Yeah, it's almost like Meyer. I don't want to say he's forgotten about, but it's almost, people are just so excited about Roman Anthony and Christian Campbell. But Meyer had himself a pretty good year last year, right? Did have a couple issues with the back. Ended up missing like the final month of the season or so. But Marcelo Mayer, and that's another point too. When you brought up Trevor Story, who knows what's going to happen with his health, moving forward. Mayer is a guy that we could potentially see this year. What are you seeing out of Marcelo Mayer right now? What do you think of the trajectory for him for 2025?
I think when he's on the field, there's no doubting the talent. Has just an unusual combination of bat to ball skills and power. The power has only grown. He started to really put up, easy plus exit velocities last year, hit for a little bit more power. Not a guy that has to sell out for it. Kind of like a natural hitter, if you want to use that sort of cliche. In every sense of the word, it's a really easy left-handed swing. He can hit a variety of pitch shapes. He can catch up to velocity. None of that is an issue. And is a solid defender. I don't think he's a plus defender, but he can play some shortstop. He's really good around the bag. It's a strong arm. The actions are pretty clean. Not the rangiest guy. He's a bigger shortstop, but we're familiar with that. And somebody like Xander Bogaerts, who was here for a bunch of years. So he's always going to have, I think, the sort of, rumors that he could potentially move to third base. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case or not. Whether he fills in at third base, fills in at shortstop. I think he's got the arm for the left side of the infield. Big thing with Meyer is just to put in the time, off the field in terms of his conditioning to make sure that he stays healthy. This is the second consecutive year that he's had a season where the season ended early. I know that's a concern within the organization, whether they vocalize that or not. And, I just think that that's the biggest concern for him. It's not the hitting. It's not the ability. He's got that in spades. He could be a star because of the tools that he has. It's just a matter of committing himself to making sure that his body's in the shape to handle 160 games. He's barely handled 100. You got to be able to play 140 if you're going to be a big league everyday regular and be a star in Boston. It's going to be too much pressure on you, especially for a young guy. If you come up and you're hitting and, there's questions about the conditioning and that sort of thing. So I think that's the biggest question mark with Meyer is like, can he play 150 games in a season? Because we haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, it's definitely something that is a thing. When you think of Meyer, right, it is the injuries, right? When it comes with Meyer, I'm glad you brought up how he's. One conversation I had recently was with Mikey Romero, and the one word he used to describe him was just professional, right? Just he's very clean with how he does everything. It is going to be interesting to see. It looks like, I think I saw a recent video of him. It looks like he is in some pretty good shape. So we'll have to see how he looks for this year.
He's never been in bad shape. It's just a matter of like what's going on. Yeah, you're not able, that you're breaking down throughout the season. He's not fat. It's not anything like that. But maybe pushing a little further, maybe changing the type of training that you're doing just to make sure that you have that endurance to handle the rigors of the long season in baseball. That's the grind, right?
Yeah. And I'm excited for, in the end, he comes off as a guy to me that is gonna take that as a challenge, right? He's gonna really, I think he's gonna go for it this year. We'll see what ends up happening, but it's a very exciting time for the Red Sox right now. But I also want to put the focus on just the other parts of the farm system right now, right? All the talk, Anthony Campbell, Meyer, but I feel like there's a lot of guys that are just not being talked about, right? There's a reason why they are ranked number one overall. And, we talked about Clay Buchholz, John Lester a little earlier. It feels like years that the Red Sox have, they just haven't really been able to develop that much talent when it comes to the pitching side of things. Sure, Tanner Houck recently, but, pretty scarce. But when you take a look at the top 30, there's a lot of guys that have emerged in these rankings, right? You got Connerly Early, Hunter Dobbins, Richard Fitz they brought in last year, right? And at Juan Valera, that's a guy who had himself a pretty solid year this past year. Still a bit further away, but, a guy that really emerged this past year. You're Donnie Monegro. There's so many underrated names. I kind of want to get your thoughts, on the pitching side of things right now.
Yeah, I think you sort of go through this organization, you're starting to see some of these guys break out. Like Perales was a massive breakout prior to getting hurt. sort of the midpoint of the season. I think it was early June in Portland. He looked like he was a guy that was, had pushed his way into our top 100, looked like he was really going to be one of the breakout pitchers of the year. David Sandlin's been a guy that, has huge stuff. The Red Sox did a great job acquiring him for, John Schreiber from, getting him from the Royals. That was a great trade, I think, just in terms of what he was able to do. And some of the guys have been able to pop in the draft.
Yeah.
Conley Early ranks inside of our top 10 in this system. Guy that spent a couple years at Army, then went to Virginia for his junior season. Left-handers saw, a little bit of a jump in terms of his velocity. Also has some really interesting sort of pitch traits as well.
Mm-hmm.
Plus changeup, showed a lot of control this year. Last year, he's a guy that I think going into this year could really pop if there's another, bit of growth in terms of his stuff. Juan Valera was a name that, could continue to jump up pretty quickly. Really, really young. Got up to low A last year. Still held opponents, hitless. I think in 8 of his 16 starts throughout the season. Another guy with good stuff. Was up to 98 miles per hour. Has a little bit of cut on that fastball. Really good slider. Just overall, I think another name that you definitely want to know. Peyton Tolley, who they drafted out of TCU, was a two-way guy at Wichita State, committed to, pitching full-time when he went to TCU. He's a guy with some really interesting traits. 6'6", 250. He's a lefty. He's got that big sort of starter's workhorse body. Missed a ton of bats last year. Creates outlier extension. It's like 7.4 feet, 7.5 feet. Some of the biggest extension you're going to see out of anybody. That obviously drops down his release height. That makes everything else play up a little bit. When you're 6'6", it means you're getting the ball to the plate all that much quicker. So it's really coming up on guys. Big thing with him is just adding some velocity. But I think when you look at the fact that, he was a two-way player for a lot of his career, and now is committed to pitching full-time really for the first time in his life over the last year. He's going to be under professional tutelage as well, and everything that comes with that. Adding velocity is something that we see quite a bit. So even if he's up to like 93, 94 consistently, because of some of those traits in terms of extension, etc., I think he's a guy that could blow up a lot. And you mentioned Monegro. It's funny, he throws hard, but the fastball shape isn't great. It's his secondaries. He's got innate feel for spin. He's got a great curveball. He's got a really good cutter. He'll show a splitter as well. And he knows how to land all of his secondaries. So I think that's really the big selling point with him. Just not great fastball shape despite the velocity. You talk about like Jedison Paez, Delvinson Reyes, two guys that sort of popped this year. And even like going back to a guy like Zach Penrod, who was added to the 40-man roster, a little bit older, but a left-hander that throws, 95 to 96, has been up to 99, 100 miles an hour. He was an indie ball signee. Like that was a great job by Red Sox signing in terms of finding that guy. But I think even beyond that, you start to see some of these Red Sox affiliates. One thing that's different from years prior, particularly like during the Dombrowski regime, is like over the last couple of years, you've really started to see different looks, different arm slots, different pitch mixes, kind of that Rays model in terms of like, we're never going to give you the same look twice out of a bullpen in a given game. And I think, that speaks volumes to how they're developing, but also the type of players that they're targeting, the types of traits that they're looking at, how they're trying to build these teams.
Yeah. It's, again, getting back to the times where, it feels like they just haven't had a whole lot of pitching. And, you go back, over the last 5 years, you can go back 5 years ago, they had basically no one in that farm system. It's pretty crazy to see how much they've added here. Peyton Tolley, right? I'm very excited about him. I think about, when I think about Tolley, it's almost like he just has this incredible base that they can work with. And he's a massive guy too, right? He almost kind of makes me think of like JJ Watt, like in the NFL, for crying out loud. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, I mean, he looks like a defensive end, they're about the same size. So he could be like the third Watt brother. It's totally possible.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Out of all of these guys, outside of Luis Perales, unfortunately had the elbow injury. Outside of him, Which one of these guys do you have your eye on this year that could, possibly emerge? Whether or not they make it to the major league level, but who's a guy that you could see really breaking out this year on the pitching side of things?
I think it's Juan Valera. You just look at the stuff that he had, the growth that he had, how dominant he was against, age appropriate competition and even some older players. Could be a guy that starts really fast at Salem, ends up at high A Greenville, and we might even see in Portland by the end of the summer. He's super young still. I think, bigger guy, athletic, 6'3", 205 is what he's listed at. And kind of just like your classic right-handed power pitcher. So for me, he's the guy that when I look throughout this list, though I like a lot of these names, I think he's the one that Red Sox fans should probably tune in a little bit more on and could easily pop his way into the top 10, especially if a few of these guys graduate.
Yeah, and the one thing I also wanted to mention too, I love that the Red Sox have been really focusing on trying to add some velocity, right, to this system. I talked with David Sandlin not too long ago on here, and this is a guy where guys throwing gas, right? It's just a matter of can he locate a little bit better, work on those secondaries. What do you think about David Sandlin moving forward? Do you think this is a guy that could really put things together for this coming year?
Be interesting to see what happens there. I think it's a matter of execution and efficiency. That's a big part of starting pitching. I think people look at stuff, they look at how hard a guy throws and like, oh, this guy could be a nasty starter. And it's like, it doesn't always work that way. You don't want a guy that wants to strike everybody out. You have to have somebody that can get a ground ball, that can get an out, is consistently going to throw strikes, isn't going to work his pitch count up too high. We're in a day and age where, once you get to 100 pitches, you're pretty much, poof, gone, right? Like you just disappear. So, you need to be able to get those 100 pitches in the most efficient way possible from start to start and help out your bullpen so you don't tax those guys. I think that's the biggest question with Sandlin. Ultimately, if I had to place like a bet on where I think he's going to end up, I would say that he's probably going to end up as like a high leverage reliever. I think he just has that level of stuff. And he's the kind of guy that you can just go out there for, 3, 4, 5 outs and just really let it fly and let him work.
I wouldn't mind maybe seeing him as a closer one day. I love a guy that comes in with some gas like that, but we'll just have to wait and see. But moving on to one more thing, but before we wrap things up here, we've talked about some of these top prospects, all the pitching that's emerged here, but there's also, I feel like personally, a lot of underrated names here. You kind of go through, you got Yoelin Cespedes, who unfortunately had an injury this year after performing pretty well. Miguel Blaze, a guy that a lot of people still see a lot of ceiling with. Those two guys are pretty far away for the most part. We got some other names, right? The Alan Castros, Mikey Romero. You got the Garcias in here. Who are some underrated names that you have your eye on, and outside of these top guys in the system?
Yeah, I would say, I like the Garcia brothers. I think you look at, John Tinson, made a huge step forward this year, just in terms of, what he's done on the field, was kind of considered an afterthought after his brother, Johan Friend, who obviously had a knee injury and missed all last year. But a guy who can mash, I think both of them can. I think Johan Friend could be a guy that moves up this year back to where he was. Somebody that was really trending up, I think, toward the top 10 last year. Catchers that can hit, that can stick behind the plate are just worth their weight in gold. There's not a lot of guys like that. We have a 55 grade on the power. I think the underlying data probably you could even put a 60 on it. He's an average defensive catcher at this point. People think he's going to stick there. That's really important to have a guy like that, to have, catching that you can develop in the system, that you don't have to trade assets for, that you don't have to go and sign in free agency. And then, the password, John Tinson, I think you look at the steps he took forward as a contact hitter last year, and just in terms of the approach and all that stuff, really took a huge step forward. He's just a natural power hitter. It's a really easy right-handed swing. When he does make contact, when he does make good contact, he does a ton of damage. And, I think for that reason, these are two guys that I'm cued in on in this system, and I think could, potentially become top 100 prospects with a really good showing.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. And I do have to ask about one guy before we get out
Sure.
of here. Red Sox fans, they need to know this. Do we have the next Shohei Ohtani in Conrad Kaysen?
Oh, definitely not. No, man,
Ah,
you're
darn.
not gonna get that. I don't think so. I would assume he's gonna commit to one or the other. If I had to guess, I would probably guess that he ends up a fielder, but I don't know that. The stuff is pretty good. Um, we'll see. Well, I don't know, if they're gonna continue, and I haven't spoke with anyone else about this in the system, so this is just me kind of free balling here. It's just really hard to do that. I
Yeah.
think we have to appreciate like how good Shohei Ohtani is and how unique he is.
Yep.
Other guys have tried to do this before. We saw Brendan McKay. It beats the heck out of your body too.
Yeah.
When you're taking all that wear and tear, because it's also, I think, like, the thing is, like, beyond just the game wear and tear, it's the training. You got to train as two separate players, right? And you have to commit time to both to be good at both. We haven't even really seen anybody who's been an everyday player that's like a closer like Zach Nato was for like Campbell in college. Like, he used to play shortstop all game, and then they'd bring him in the ninth inning, and he would just throw gas off the mound, right?
Yeah.
You don't see anybody like that even in pro ball. And there's
Yep.
plenty of guys that can do it. We do see the rare position player like Brett Phillips or something come in. He's now pursuing his career as a pitcher, but we do see the rare guy come in from like the outfield and like throw smoke. But to really be a professional pitcher and do it well, it takes a lot of commitment. To be a really good professional hitter, especially if you're playing a position like shortstop and do it well, it takes a lot of commitment. So I doubt it. That's not to say that they maybe don't write it off, because they might still be deciding for themselves, like, do we like him as a pitcher or as a hitter? And they just sort of throw him to the wolves and see what happens. I mean, Mason Wynn was as legitimate of a two-way prospect as we've seen coming out of high school. A guy that was up to 100 miles per hour on the mound. You could see him on a given day in a prep tournament. He's striking everybody out and just throwing absolute smoke, and he's got that swagger. And then you'd see, the swing wasn't great, right? That was the big question mark with him, was like, I don't know if he's going to hit. He'll probably end up a pitcher. And then, makes a couple of tweaks. Swing takes a step forward. He starts to hit. And, a couple of years later, he's the everyday shortstop and the leadoff hitter for the Cardinals. So I think ultimately all of these guys end up having to choose one. Shohei Ohtani is just a freak of freaks. And we just got to appreciate that this is the LeBron of baseball. This is the guy with all the tools, all the ability, all the skills, everything's married together. When we kind of put players into buckets, we kind of put players into like athleticism buckets. We put them into tool buckets. And I think, unfortunately, basketball is a great example of this. Like, Steph Curry, ultimate skill player, right? Russell Westbrook, ultimate athleticism player. If you gave Russell Westbrook Curry skills, he's LeBron, right? If you gave Curry Russell Westbrook's athleticism, he's LeBron, right? It's like, but if you gave Westbrook Curry's athleticism, he's playing D2 basketball. It's like there's like those really thin lines, and there's just so few players that can do all those things and marry all that together. And that's why I think Conrad's going to end up picking one or the other.
Well, whatever he ends up being, he's definitely an exciting prospect to keep an eye on. And this whole farm system is looking very exciting. It's been a down 5 years now, and it's nice to see everything kind of start to take shape. And hey, the number one farm system in all of baseball. But Geoff, I want to thank you for coming out here today. This was awesome. I really love this talk. Let the viewers know what's going on at Baseball America. Any new things cooking up? What do you got going on over there?
Yeah, Top 30 is just released. We got all the college baseball content rolling out as the college baseball season is just weeks away. We get excited for that. We cover every level of baseball, from high school to college to JUCO, draft coverage, and extensive draft coverage at that, with a ton of history going back, decades in terms of what you can search on the Baseball America website. Fantasy content as well. We started to get into a lot more baseball card content. So really anything that touches baseball in any way, shape, or form, any content you're looking for, we got that on the site. Tons of podcasts, tons of information, Q&As and chats weekly all throughout the season. So, we're always happy to interact with everybody and, try to put out as much content, covering as much in the game to inform our readers as we can.
For sure, and it's definitely helped me over the years, trying to talk about as many prospects as I can. I don't know how you guys do it, to be honest. It's just whack in my head. But thank you for all you do. But again, for the viewers, again, if you are with us here on YouTube, you can see on the screen here, you can use the code Monster30 and you can get 30% off for your first year subscription. It's absolutely worth it, I'm telling you. But everyone, thank you for joining us today. Really do appreciate it. If you are with us here on YouTube, hit that like button for us. Subscribe if you are new. Go subscribe over to the Baseball America channel as well, and go sign up for that membership. It's really good. But everyone, thanks again, and we'll talk to you next time.